politics and faith in politics and Labour's faith in politics, etc., and all those things is one that fires me and has always fired me. What we do as a charity, this isn't to tell you about us, but as a charity, what we do is we invest in building integrated communities where everyone's valued, everyone's included, and everyone can achieve their God-given potential. I began Oasis because of my Christian faith 31 years ago. When I was a kid, I was 14, I became a Christian. I decided that what I wanted to do when I grew up is set up a hostel and a hospital and a school. Today, Oasis employs more than 5,000 staff here in the UK and works in 10 other countries around the world. In the UK, we have 25,000 children in our schools. This year, we will house around about 1,000 vulnerable young people in our housing projects. Besides that, we run here a city farms, cafes, gyms, all sorts of things. Anything that builds community and relationship that's integrated and whole. Oasis has worked here in Waterloo since 2003. I became the minister in my spare time of what was a very small church. And that's why there's a spire here. And the church has grown. So now, because of the vision of the church here and the 10 or 12 people that were originally part of that church, we employ more than 200 people in the community. We run a children's centre, a primary school, a secondary school, adult education opportunities, a food bank, a debt advice centre, a community farm, a higher education college, community coffee house, and a wine bar. Hope some of you bought some wine. And a host of other things, all driven by our faith. An inclusive faith in the heart of the city. Wherever we work, we always work in exactly the same way. It's to serve everyone, irrespective and regardless of their gender, their race, their ethnic origin, their religion, their age, their sexual orientation, etc. And we also work in close partnership here with Lambeth Council and with Southwark Council, because we're right on the borders. Our latest project, we've taken on the local library, which is here, some of you would have seen, because of the cutbacks that Lambeth had to make, shut lots of its libraries, 5 of its libraries. We're not particularly happy that we've taken on the library, because these are savage cuts from central government that denuded the local authority here. But in the end, driven by a pragmatism that says children here need literacy, they need hope, they need imagination, creativity. It's either you take on something that actually you think, in the end, somebody else should be providing, or you let it drop, because we're involved in the world of politics. We never proselytise. Everything we do is unconditional for everyone. At least 60 or 70% of the kids in our 2 schools here, which are both oversubscribed, come from Muslim backgrounds. We're non-selective, we're always inclusive. We are an academy provider, not like academy providers you hear of, probably a myth, select and etc. Local people and parents are involved in all of this. We do this because of our faith, and tonight we're here to talk about faith, to Jeremy and to Owen, and to listen to what they have to say about what Labour would look like under their leadership, taking the role of faith groups very seriously in building local communities and helping shape global policies as well. Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, the Jewish community, secularists, humanists, all these are great faiths. It's important that we understand that faith and politics mix. My dad used to say to me, faith and politics don't mix. He got really upset when I was a kid one day and he walked out of the church because he said they were preaching politics. I've learned that the only thing that doesn't mix is faith and apathy. We have to be involved. It's not an option. It's the core of any and every responsible reading of any of the great faiths and worldviews. This evening's been put together by the Good Faith Partnership and my friend Russ Rook, who's down here, who called me when I was on holiday and said, I've got this idea, and so this whole thing has come together because of Russ's hard work. And it's come together because of the support of these three faith movements. And so for 30 seconds each, I'm going to give them an opportunity of introducing themselves to you. And first of all, I'm going to invite up here Peter Mason from the Jewish Labour movement. Peter, give me a round of applause.
Everybody for coming. The Jewish Labour movement is a formal affiliate of the Labour Party and has been for almost 100 years. We will be celebrating our centenary in 2020, hopefully in the same year that we return a Labour government to this country. And we are a group of Jewish Labour activists we're a Zionist organisation, a socialist Zionist organisation, who see our role in the Jewish Labour movement as fulfilling the Jewish principles of tzedek, justice, and tikkun olam, the repair of the world, through the actions that we do in this country, in supporting the Labour Party and seeking to secure a Labour government, in Europe, combating the rise of the far right and anti-immigrant sentiment, and also in Israel, where we support a two-state solution, the end to the occupation, and what we would like to see in this country, which is the rapid and swift removal of the incumbent government and hopefully a left-wing one in its place. So thank you very much for coming this evening. I'm sure this evening will be very interesting. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And secondly, the second sponsoring group is Christians on the Left, and Andy Flanagan is going to tell us a word about their work.
Good evening, folks. How are you? Good. Looking around, I know that I won't bore you with a spiel about Christians on the Left, because I can see many members of Christians on the Left here. If you don't happen to be a member and you would like to be a member of Christians on the Left, then why not join tonight? If you happen not to be, we are very welcoming of everyone. We really want to say thank you to Russ for putting on tonight a Good Faith Partnership, pulling this together. We hope it's the start of even more interaction and creative interaction between all these different groups who represent the different faith groups that interact with the Labour Party. I am inspired by Martin Luther King, who, when he said, you know, the church and other faith groups were good at being the good Samaritan on life's roadside. We're hardwired for compassion. We're hardwired to help people when we see that need in our faces, as the church has been doing right here. But he said what we're not so good at often is going back to the Jericho Road to make sure that nobody else gets mugged. And in 2016, even on the Jericho Road, that might look like more CCTV, more police on the beat, more street lighting. But you can bet your life that those discussions happen around really boring council committee room tables. Not half as exciting as meeting that need. And we need to do both. We need to do both. We need to be those who are helping people face to face, hand to hand, but also going back to the Jericho Road, to those more boring places. And the gents on the stage know about those boring places. We need to be involved and see change. Is that not right? We need to be involved and see change to that system. Otherwise, the church and other faith groups will spend the next 50 years as the paramedics of the United Kingdom. I don't believe we want that, and I think the people in this room don't want that, and I think the gentlemen on the stage have something to say. Thank you. Thank you. Come and join us.
And then lastly, Sikhs for Labour and Jasveer Singh is going to come and speak to us.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today. Sikhs for Labour was founded in 2013. We are the youngest of the faith organisations that have been part of the Labour Party, but that doesn't mean we haven't been very active. We've been actively involved in a lot of campaigning over the last few years. May not still have any Sikh representatives on the Labour benches in Parliament, but that doesn't mean that we can't do good work outside of that, and we have been working very actively to get people elected, including Sadiq Khan in his mayoral campaign. I'm sure all of us can agree that Sadiq represents an individual who shows just how much a person of faith, regardless of what his or her faith may be, can be a good person who can make a massive change in society. And I'm sure all of us in this room were very proud to see him elected just a few months ago. Now, Sikhs for Labour have decided to participate in this particular hustings because we want to see a collaborative approach. We don't want to see confrontation. We don't want to see individuals pitching themselves against one another. We want to see what we can do to make society better by working together. And I hope that all of us today will be able to ask questions and make sure that we get the best from each of the two candidates tonight to see what we can do together to make this Labour family as united as ever before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jasvir. That's great. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here tonight. It's a fantastic thing. Thank you to Jeremy and Owen and Jeremy for giving us your time, for taking this subject of spirituality and its holistic outworking in every community and in shaping the world that we live in really seriously. We much appreciate that because we know you've both got lots of things you should be doing. So we're glad you're here. Let me tell you about the plan for this evening. The plan is simply, in a moment I'm going to hand over to Tim Livesey, who is our chair for the evening. Tim is somebody who's worked in the Labour Party and with the Labour Party and for the Labour Party over many years and is passionately concerned about these issues. It's a real privilege that Tim is here to chair this evening for us. What will happen is Tim will lead us through the evening. There are going to be 4 faith speakers representing 4 faiths just for a few minutes each, talking about the role of their faith in shaping politics and our globalised world. And then after that, the 2 candidates are going to speak. They tossed a coin, and Jeremy's going to go first, Owen's going to go second, and they're going to speak to us. And then the rest of the evening is handed over for questions and answers. But on your way in, you were given the opportunity of writing a question. I hope you took that opportunity. And we've got a little team from the different sponsoring bodies, the faith groups that you've heard about, and what they're doing is analysing all of those questions, because there are many repeats, obviously, around the same themes, putting those questions together, and so they will put those together. If your question is chosen, I think you may even be asked to suggest it yourself, speak it out yourself in your own words. If your question isn't chosen, that's simply because there's a time limit on this evening, so we felt this was just the fairest way of bundling the questions together. Of course, ultimately the questions are passed through to Tim, and as chairman he has executive responsibility for deciding what's asked and what isn't, and even adding his own in. Who knows? So that's how it will happen. If your question isn't asked, that's simply because of the time constraints. But it is worth saying that actually your question should be asked. But that's the whole point. Our engagement in politics isn't about this event, it's about the lives that we lead. And there's lots of opportunities to ask those questions publicly all of the time. So we should take them up. There are just a few ground rules I'd like to give you, and there's a slide coming up around those right now. And I hope, there it comes, the ground rules. So I'd like you to agree to these. We agree to listen respectfully to one another because our faith demands of us that our lives are lived in a particular way. That's not to be rude, it's not to knock down, it's to listen to respectfully. We agree to listen to one another without interrupting. I hate Radio 4 when you can never actually listen to the thread of any argument because some presenter butts in after 3 words have been spoken. We don't like that because we learn nothing. So we listen because that way we can learn without interrupting. We acknowledge that although we hold different perspectives, everyone who is asked to speak has the right to be heard. And we enter this conversation with an open attitude, prepared to be challenged by the views of others, as well as to challenge, and all to be open to the nuance of change. So, with that understood and accepted by us all, do we accept that? Woo! With that accepted, I once again, I'm really pleased you're here in the Oasis Centre, and hand over to Tim. Give him a round of applause.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Steve, for the intro, for lending us your wonderful premises, and to Russ and the Good Faith Partnership for getting us together. And thank you, obviously, particularly to Jeremy and to Owen for coming, spending time with us. We really appreciate it. Okay, without further ado, we're going to have 4 very short presentations from members of the Sikh, Jewish, Muslim and Christian communities, and then we're going to go and hear from the 2 candidates directly. They're going to speak for however long they speak, but probably about 8 or 10 minutes or 4 minutes, or we'll see. And then we're going to go to questions. So the 4 people who've come here today just to talk very briefly as an intro are first of all Kirith Alawalia, who's a Sikh activist from West London. Kirith will be followed by Njoki Mahiaini, who's from the Christians on the Left Executive. Oh, sorry, actually, Danny, I think you're second. Danny Rich is the Senior Rabbi and Chief Executive Liberal Judaism, and followed by Njoki, and then finally Anjali Rauf, who's founder of a human rights NGO called Making Her Story, and is a member of the Muslim community. So, without further ado, Kirith, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Tim, and good evening, everyone. The Labour Party has historically had a challenging relationship with faith communities. Whilst one Labour PM, Harold Wilson, declared that Labour owes more to Methodism than Marxism, the advisor to another, Alistair Campbell, stopped Tony Blair from talking about his own faith just 13 years ago by saying, "We don't do God." As a structure, the party has an understanding that religion is important to many people, but it can often find itself at a loss as to how to engage properly with the communities themselves. The starting point for any engagement needs to be faith literacy. I'm a Sikh, but the way that I practice my faith may be different to how others practice theirs. Just like other communities, people of faith have diverse views on a variety of topics. However, faiths can unite people in a way that is quite distinct. We have a shared language, a shared vision, a focus on looking after our fellow brothers and sisters in society, whatever background they may come from, and an understanding that faith is far more good than it is given credit for by many in society, including some of our own MPs. The Labour Party needs to do more to understand the differences between faith as well as within faiths, and it needs to be proactive in doing so. Faith literacy training would be a good start to this. We also need to see more written work from MPs on issues of faith, more activity around hosting faith-related events and discussions. And I think this is more important now, more than ever, with the rise in hate crime and xenophobia following the Brexit result. We need to be encouraging and fostering understanding and education around faiths, and there should certainly be no place for anti-Semitism or ignorance. There also needs to be a far better awareness of the Eastern faith communities, such as the Hindu and Sikh faiths. It's no good turning up to Gurdwaras on Mondays for photo opportunities and just leaving. The days of community elders have been consigned to history. There needs to be a deeper level of engagement, one which is not afraid of challenges or debate. Our politicians must also show that they truly understand the meaning and significance of different cultures and religious traditions. Sadly for us, David Cameron excelled in that respect, and the Labour leadership has been left flailing behind. In 2011, he held the first ever Sikh reception at number 10. In 2013, he became the first PM to visit the Golden Temple in Amritsar, the Sikh faith's holiest of holies. And in the days before the general election last year, he travelled to Kent to actively participate in the festivities for Saki, with images of him and his wife dressed for the occasion on the covers of the Sunday papers. As a result of his impressive engagement with the Sikh community, a poll survey found that 49% of British Sikhs voted for the Tories in the last year's general election, and only 41% for Labour. When my parents and grandparents first came to the UK in the 70s, it was the Labour Party that was there for them. Labour pushed through equality laws in employment and discrimination. Labour ensured that Britain was a country where they were welcome. Britain has changed, as have faith communities. Ethnically diverse faith communities no longer want to feel just welcome. We want to be understood. We want to be valued. We want proper engagement. And as a woman from a faith background, I find it incredibly sad that the Tories have now had 2 female PMs, whilst we are still waiting to elect our first ever female leader. So how can faith communities work with Labour to renew both the party and society? Dialogue. People of faith have been engaging in dialogue with ourselves and with others for the last 5 millennia. Dialogue is our strength, and we shouldn't be ignored. Places of worship, like this one, are venues where dialogue and discussion on diverse topics take place week in and week out. According to the last census, almost 68% of Brits consider themselves to belong to a faith community. Considering that the turnout for the general election last year was 66%, faith communities are ignored at the Labour Party's peril. Labour must do much more than it has done so far when it comes to engaging people of faith. And today's hustings is without a doubt the first step in the right direction, something that both Jeremy Corbyn and Owen Smith should be commended for participating in. I look forward to hearing from them both this evening. Thank you.
Friends, can I first thank Steve and Jeremy and Owen and the Good Faith Partnership for both inviting me, but more importantly, for putting on this event this evening, which I think is an important statement about where Labour might be. Faith matters to a large number of people in the United Kingdom, and if faith, including but not restricted to organised religion, matters to citizens of this country, then it should matter to the Labour Party, and as importantly, be seen to matter. Faith and religion are of course not the same as political parties and the socialist movement, but it is perhaps fair to appreciate that they frequently share an overriding objective, the fulfilment of all individuals' potential within a value-laden society. Religion and politics may utilise different vocabulary and may from time to time be in creative disagreement, but there's much they have in common, including the desire to serve, an understanding of collective endeavour, and an appreciation of the diversity of talents and contributions. Indeed, that sounds a bit like a mini Labour Party manifesto, doesn't it? So let me be clear, I'm not in favour of religious exemptions from mainstream political principles, or for example, the equality of opportunity or non-discrimination in the provision of public services. But religious beliefs and practices play an important role in the stability and cooperative nature of communities. And the fear that a secular socialist movement does not always appreciate this makes the possibility of a Labour government more distant than it might be otherwise, and perhaps further away than most of us here would hope. As the Jewish contributor this evening, and a member of the Jewish Labour movement, although I speak in an individual capacity, I cannot but make a comment on anti-Semitism. As a Labour Party member and campaigner against all types of racism, including anti-Semitism, for more than 30 years, I cannot tell you how much it grieves me when I hear that former and current Jewish members and supporters of the party tell me how they're currently feeling. Jews are not paranoid or manipulative, and their genuine distress and troubling experiences need to be acknowledged by and seen to be heard at the highest levels of the Labour Party. It has never been, and should never be, the policy of the Labour Party to sacrifice one group
to gain popularity elsewhere. In conclusion, I trust that the next leader of the Labour Party will not only take people and matters of faith seriously, but be demonstratively seen to do so. Perhaps I might end, I hadn't planned to, perhaps I end with a rabbinic advice or rabbinic aphorism given by Rabbi Tarfon, who lived a very long time ago. But he said, we are not at liberty to, we're not required to complete the task, but neither are we at liberty to abstain from it. My message to our two candidates, and indeed to our party, we are not privileged, and we don't have the right, if we want a Labour government, to absent ourselves from this debate, even if we don't conclude it.
Faith. It's not a subject that we as a movement often discuss, but given that millions of Brits practice a faith, and of those a majority vote, perhaps it's time we did. But first, we need to accept that putting faith before faction is not political heresy. For example, I'm a member of Christians on the left. I'm a Christian, I'm on the left, and for me, it's very much in that order. But don't misunderstand me, I am a committed Labour supporter. I love this party, and I've served it as a member and a candidate for over a decade. And it may not be the same for others who profess faith, but for me at least, my identity as a Labour member is built on an even stronger identity as a Christian. Our party's roots in faith, particularly Christianity, provided the moral basis for our present-day commitments to human rights, inclusion, and poverty alleviation. Yet I fear that some of us now see talk of moral responsibility as amoral in itself. From Tawney to Hardy to the influence of Catholic social teaching, we must be loath to unpick the Christian thread woven throughout our party's history. Nor should we squeeze out more conservative voices who believe there's still a debate to be had on issues of life and liberty. If there's anything the general election or Brexit should teach us, it's that we must seek to remain a broad church. You see, it's not that people of faith are just decent folk who want to do their bit. No, their religions call them to act, or as the Bible puts it, faith without deeds is dead. So of course, faith is personal. But in order for it to be a force for good, its outworking must be interpersonal. As a party, this means actively recognizing the immense cultural capital generated by faith groups. That's the language classes, the befriending projects, holiday clubs, parent-toddler groups, community choirs, youth groups, and numerous other initiatives run for free and with a cheerful heart, week in, week out, all over this country. It means campaigning on what unites us. That common ground which crosses factions and faith is what we as a party must cultivate, and in doing so demonstrate what it means to disagree well. It's a time of enormous upheaval for our party, but I'm convinced that faith communities who have practiced in cooperation despite internal disagreement can be amongst our closest allies as we take on whatever chaos or glory lies ahead. After all, at our best, we are families of faith, in which genuine differences may be held in tension with the common truths to which we cling. And I think that we can all agree that that is the kind of family that we hope and pray the Labour Party will be.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. Living as I do, as a woman of both faith and colour, and a very visible faith at that, I confess that all too often I find myself being torn between my inner world and the outer one. The otherness that I, and all too many others, are made to feel in our daily lives, whether it be as children in the education sphere, adults in the work sphere, or in my case, as a Muslim human rights activist in the feminist sphere, It is a feeling that I find replicated, punctuated, and even exaggerated within the political sphere. Just to give you a brief example, a few years ago, I, together with a group of feminists, organised a debate in Parliament on the trafficking and enslavement of migrant domestic workers by diplomatic communities here in the UK. Our audience was largely comprised of MPs, a scattering of journalists and feminists, most of whom were of no visible faith. At the end of the event, two female MPs, I won't mention which parties they were from, wandered up to me to congratulate me on being present at the debate and to ask me if I understood it all. I replied that as I was the founder and CEO of one of the charities that was hosting the event, British-born and an Oxbridge graduate, that had just about managed to capture it all. Thank you very much. I can laugh about this incident now, but at the time it felt like a million I'd encountered before and was sick of encountering across all parties. That feeling of being invisible, of being overlooked and spoken for, because paradoxically you are too visible, in displaying a religious alliance is exhausting, debilitating and patronising. And unfortunately, when it comes to the core political parties, and therefore, unfortunately, when it comes to the core political parties, religion, and therefore persons of religion, are very much a misnomer, the unwanted, all too visible elephant in the room. A fact that I find hugely ironic when considering that it is faith that governs the actions, choices and thoughts of between a third to half of the nation's electorates, and I'm sure many more who are too embarrassed to confess a faith. From domestic and foreign policy decisions to party campaign strategies to how I view what crops up on my Facebook and Twitter feeds, devout persons like myself, everything is viewed with an inner moral compass that is governed by my faith. I have always been a Labour supporter. Coming from a working class background, I was never in any doubt that the party that stood up for my parents and who they loved was the party for me. But until it can be brave enough to actively acknowledge that we exist, wear down fears, suspicions and prejudices, and hold a genuine respect for our capacities to contribute and strengthen it from within, only then will the Labour Party truly become what people wish it to be, a party everyone of any and all religion can truly put their faith in. The question, of course, is this party brave enough to take those crucial steps? And judging from tonight, I hope that that answer is a resounding yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed to our four speakers. These are challenging times for the Labour Party, we all know that. And I think that what we've heard so far, frankly, is an antidote to the times when you feel a bit low and a bit concerned about the future. What fantastic talent, what fantastic vision, what great courage and commitment, and frankly, also what great eloquence, which I'm sure is about to be matched by our two speakers this evening. We came here to share, but we also came to listen particularly to Jeremy and to Owen, and I'm really very pleased and proud to welcome them on your behalf this evening, and to ask Jeremy, as the winner of the coin toss, to start the proceedings. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us along this evening, and thank you, Steve, for giving us the space and hosting this event, because just having the event itself is obviously extremely important, and the four speeches we've just heard indicate the depth of feeling and the depth of strength of support for the Labour Party and the Labour movement within all of the faith communities in Britain. And the Labour Party was founded in the turn of the 19th and 20th century. Its original involvement came from Christians, came from Jews, came from the Sikhs that were present in Britain at that time, as indeed it came from the Muslim and other communities. And quite specifically, Christian and Jewish groups were involved in the party at the very beginning. And so there's always been that linkage. And the role of the churches, synagogues and other places of worship in the 19th century were incredibly significant in the growth of community politics, because they gave a space for organisation, they gave a space for meeting, and they gave an opportunity for people to come together. So you look at any of the big industrial cities of Britain and you'll see where the big Christian churches that were built at that time actually became a foundation point, not just for the Labour Party and the Labour movement, but also for trade unions and also for many good causes and campaigns that were founded. Indeed, those early campaigns for the idea of a state pension and many other things often emanated from the principles of the faith communities. I have the pleasure and honour to represent a inner city community, not so far from here, Islington North, around Finsbury Park. I don't know the exact number of languages spoken in my constituency, but it's at least 70, and there are people of all faiths and humanists who don't follow any particular organised religion. And as a community, it is a joy to represent. And when I was trying to describe this community to a journalist from the New York Times who had come to visit Finsbury Park Mosque, he said, "What's it like around here?" So I stood on the road and said, "Well, up there there's a synagogue, over there there's a mosque, over there there's a Catholic church, up there there's an Anglican church, there's a Buddhist temple down the road, there's a Hindu temple over this way." And he said, "Stop, this sounds like a complete nightmare to represent. How do you cope?" And I said, "Well, actually, it all works incredibly well, because there is that degree of respect and understanding. And that degree of respect and understanding comes from the fundamental tenets of all of those faiths and the work of faith forums and of the schools within our communities." And so I have the pleasure of representing that community. It doesn't mean that at times there aren't quite difficult conversations to have, quite difficult conversations of votes in Parliament on gay rights, on abortion, on it in the past, on satanic verses and other issues like that. Those conversations have to take place, and they must take place, and they must take place from the principle of respect for everyone's right to follow the faith of their choice, the rest of the community to respect that, and our young people to grow up understanding the basic tenets of all faiths. And so I think it's absolutely essential that our schools, be they faith schools or non-faith schools, do bring up our children understanding the broad principles of all the great faiths in the world. And indeed, one of the best descriptions I ever heard of the basic tenets of Islam was at a girls' Catholic school, who couldn't possibly have known I was coming that day, because I didn't either until I got there, and was able to listen to this lesson on it. And I was very, very impressed with it and the way in which the school dealt with it. So these core values of all of the great faiths are about community, are about involvement, are about peace, and are about looking out for and protecting each other. Think of the work that's done in a charitable way. We have Christian churches operating food banks for many years, and particularly for the refugee community. You have Sikh temples feeding anyone who comes. You have mosques that are supporting people going through a hard time. And you have synagogues doing much the same. And indeed, to me, one of the most moving occasions I've had in politics for a very long time was when an Islamic centre in Muswell Hill was burnt down It was the local synagogue that offered the community a place and a space to meet and assisted with the campaign to encourage the council, it was the neighbouring council of Barnet, and the local community to support the rebuilding of that centre. What a wonderful example of two communities coming together, recognising each other's values and supporting each other at a time of incredible hardship. In this campaign for election of leader of the party, I've put forward a series of policy ideas. I've set them out as 10 points, relating essentially, firstly, around economy, on the need for an economy that works for all, an economy that doesn't have intergenerational poverty at its core by the continual reduction in public spending by central government on the crucial services that we need. Steve was talking about the loss of the library services in Lambeth. You could ditto that in every other local authority across Britain, what has been lost. And so the fundamental policy is one of investment in a growing economy in order to provide the services that are absolutely necessary. And we as a party have got to be unequivocal that we're proud of a substantial level of public spending that does create a greater level of equality within our society and does give everyone the chance to learn in schools, obviously, but also the chance to use libraries and the chance to express themselves in any artistic or cultural form. These things are absolutely central and crucial to what we believe in. I'm also very concerned about the levels of racism within our society and the way in which human rights is treated, not just in this country, but in so many other parts of the world. The great achievement of the post-war period was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations. The great achievement across Europe, despite all the difficulties and chaos of post-war Europe and the developing Cold War, was the European Convention on Human Rights and the development of the European Court of Human Rights. It grieves me that so many of our newspapers spend their whole time calling human rights controversial, describing our Labour government's Human Rights Act of 1998 as somehow or other controversial and damaging to community relations. Can't we be proud of the fact that we sign up to a Universal Declaration of Human Rights that does guarantee the right to follow your faith, that does guarantee your right of free speech, that does require your state to protect you against abuse by anyone else, and of course does help to guarantee people rights of asylum. And the faith communities have done a great deal to help those that are fleeing from oppression, drowning in the Mediterranean or the Aegean, or trying to get across the border from Greece into Macedonia or somewhere else. I say this: you're not going to solve the refugee crisis in Europe and the rest of the world by gunboats and surveillance. You're only going to solve it by humanity and political solutions to the war problems that brought about the refugee crisis in the first place. I am alarmed at racism within our society at any level, and obviously more than alarmed at the allegations that there is any degree of anti-Semitism or any other form of racism within our party, and therefore I asked Shami Chakrabarti, after she had ceased to be the Director of Liberty, to undertake a report and investigation into this, which she did it quite quickly, because I asked her to do it quickly in 2 months, and the report has been presented to our National Executive with a series of rule changes within the party. And in advance of that, I asked the National Executive, which they did unanimously, to agree a declaration on the principles of anti-racism and inclusivity within our party. And Shami's report does identify some issues and problems, does identify a way forward in dealing with allegations against individuals. They can be dealt with in a proper and transparent manner, but also a process of education and inclusion within our party. And so our party has to have a strong and effective relationship with all of the faith communities. It cannot be just photo opportunities where MPs, parliamentary candidates, front bench, party leader or anyone turns up, does a photo opportunity and goes away. It has to be a more serious engagement than that, and much more of a two-way relationship. And I hope that we can develop that relationship as time goes on, and certainly I commit myself to continue doing that, because faith communities are a very large part of our society and of people's lives. They're also communities that do provide a place of safety for those that are going through something deeply horrible. A lot of speakers already have talked about the horrors of the hate crimes that have happened post-Brexit vote in Britain. Disgusting degrees of racist abuse on the streets, racism in the buses, racism on the trains, and also, in some cases, quite vile attacks on people, such as that poor man who died in Peterborough, Harlow rather, only last week. And so we have to stand up against that. And that means communities coming together. And what we did in my own community straight after the horrific rise in hate crime was to call a community event in a park in my community where every faith was represented and every faith delivered their contribution to it and their determination that we would work together in order not just to identify and deal with the perpetrators of hate crime, but also encourage our young people to grow up in a world that actually understands the importance of community involvement. We are a party of now more than 500,000 members, with a very large number of affiliated members through trade unions and registered supporters. This is a time as a party when we can deliver in real terms, in real time, with our huge membership, that message that Britain does not have to be a society of inequality. We don't have to say to the next generation, you're going to be worse off than this generation. We don't have to run an economy in the interests of the few instead of the many. And we do have to ensure that young people don't get penalised for the education they wish to follow, and that we deal with the housing crisis and we deal with the poverty crisis in the way that the Labour movement and the Labour Party was always set up to do. That is by the community providing for the needs and good of all. That was the principles behind the welfare state, the principles behind the National Health Service, and the principles behind the idea of provision of council housing and good quality housing for all. These are times of incredible opportunity for us. The Conservatives will take us in a direction of an unequal society, a low corporate, low wealth tax society, and at the same time destroying the public services that the majority of the population actually rely on. We can unite people around that. Unite people of all faiths. Unite people around the principles of our movement. That is what's so exciting about it. That is what I've tried to do during the short time since I was first elected as the leader of the party. And that is what I want to carry on doing. And I want our party to come together around those principles. Come together on what we can achieve together. Come together on the kind of society we can, and I believe must, develop in Britain for the good of this generation, but in particular for the generations that follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now it's my turn. Good evening, everybody. Delighted to be here. Thank you ever so much, Stephen, for organising this evening, and for Tim for chairing, and for our speakers. I thought the speeches we heard starting tonight were uplifting and dispiriting in equal measure. Uplifting because they were, as Tim said, genuinely very eloquent and thought-provoking and hope-filled speeches in many ways. Dispiriting because there was a common theme to them. And it was Stephen, I think, who started the theme with his suggestion that his dad once told him that faith and politics don't mix. And the theme that I heard in all of those speeches was that politics is still failing to understand faith properly and still failing to engage with faith properly. All politicians and all politics, not just the Labour Party. But it's particularly hurtful when it is the Labour Party, because we are in the Labour Party, we love the Labour Party, and I think we understand, I've always understood innately, that there is a deep connection between faiths, all of the great religions of the world, if you like, and the Labour Party's faith, our faith in socialism, not just the rootedness that Jeremy talked about, but the fundamentals, the understanding. I've always felt that my Labour values were about making hope more credible than despair convincing. And that's always felt to me to be a set of values that anybody of any faith in any religion anywhere in the world could understand as being at the heart of their faith. Now, I'm not a person of religious faith myself, no faith whatsoever, but I am someone who has a very deep understanding of the importance of faith to others, to individuals, to movements, to societies, and a very deep understanding of the importance of faith to our movement, to the Labour movement. Perhaps it's because I'm Welsh, and there is a very deep connection, I think, in the Welsh Labour tradition between religion, between faith. It goes back, I suppose, right into the 19th century, and Robert Owen, that great original Christian socialist, who I think it's 200 years this year, established at New Lanark the institute that gave birth to the cooperative movement, to so many of the fundamental tenets that we now accept as being at the heart of the Labour movement: social justice, cooperation, tolerance of others, respect for others. And then at the beginning of the 19th century, 20th century rather, as Jeremy said earlier on, in my own constituency and the neighbouring constituency of Aberdare, the connections between the great Methodist revival of 1904-05 and the birth of the Labour Party. Hardy, of course, being elected in 1900 to the great seat in South Wales that he held throughout his period. And that's, of course, where that Wilson lie about Labour owing as much to Methodism as to Marx comes from. And it still felt very true, that, to me. And certainly in South Wales we have a very deep understanding of that, because those values, solidarity, compassion, tolerance, respect for others, mutualism, they all feel to me to be absolutely central to my understanding of my politics, as they are central to the politics and the faith of so many others. And if anything, moving away from the history of our movement, it feels even more important today that we've got in Labour a deep understanding of people's faith and how it motivates people, and that we do understand it because we need to rely upon faith, I think. A better understanding of faith, a deeper understanding of how we can build connections between our movement and faith movements in this country. And I'll just give you two statistics, I suppose, that illustrate the pressing need for faith organisations in this country and the pressing need for Labour to connect through those organisations and with those organisations when it comes to our mission of changing the world, of making hope credible, of giving people a sense of belonging and of building a more equal and tolerant and diverse society. And the first is, of course, that there are over 1 million people who were given food parcels last year in this country. It's a 1,000-fold increase that we've seen in that awful statistic since the Tories came to power. I still find that absolutely extraordinary. I've opened 3 food banks in my own constituency since I became an MP 6 years ago. That's a badge of shame for our society that we've done that. But all of those food banks are run by and are administered by people of faith, different churches in my constituency in Pontypridd, and we would be immeasurably worse off as a local community were it not for the work, the incredible, dedicated work of the people providing that support. The other statistics, I think, are equally horrifying. 60% increase in hate crime in this country since Brexit. More than 100% increase in hate crime since 2010. An extraordinary statistic when one thinks of the gains we've made as a society over the last 20 years in celebrating, not just tolerating, celebrating diversity in Britain. We are a country of immigrants. That South Wales community I was talking about earlier on was born out of immigration. We should be celebrating the diversity of our population here in the UK, and yet we feel ever more divided, ever more ugly in our political discourse, ever more mindful of the things that separate us rather than the things that we hold in common and that we cherish in common. And the Labour Party and faith organisations, faith communities in this country understand that perhaps more deeply than many other parts of our country. And it's always been the case, from the establishment of the welfare state through to the anti-apartheid movement, through to making poverty history, the churches and the Labour Party have worked hand in glove in this country, in the past and as we are doing so in the present. The migrant crisis that Jeremy mentioned, 3,000 people who've died in the Mediterranean in this last year. These are stark statistics and benchmarks of the scale of the challenge we face as a set of communities and as a society, and the scale of the task that faces the labour movement and the churches in seeking to address that. Because I often say at these meetings, if it isn't us, if it isn't the Labour Party and the labour movement and faith organisations that speak to better values, to decency, to the celebration of diversity, to an understanding of others, then who will in our society? Because it's always been us. For 116 years since we've had the Labour Party, we have been the political part of our society that has spoken to those better values consistently. And my greatest concern in this contest between Jeremy and I know Stephen said we shouldn't make this about individuals, but there is a contest being fought out between the two of us, is those statistics and that need for a greater understanding in our communities, the need for tolerance, the need for diversity, the need to celebrate those things. You need a Labour government in order to achieve some of that. And the proof of that is the change that the last Labour government made to this society of ours. Because however intangible some of the ways in which we change society, I think all of us can recognise that in that period between 1997 and 2010, when we had a Labour government, we did move on in Britain into a more tolerant, accepting, celebratory society in which diversity was not just something we talked about, something that was embraced for in Britain. And we are moving backwards. We've moved backwards in those measurements about hate crime, but we've moved backwards in our public discourse. I thought the contest between Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith was probably the ugliest political contest I've seen in my lifetime. I've not seen race deployed in a political battle in the way in which it was during that contest here in London. I've not seen race deployed during a public debate as it was in Brexit in my lifetime. I think these are all retrograde steps for us in Britain, and I know that faith communities and the labour movement are collectively and individually deeply concerned about this, and concerned because right now we're sitting on the sidelines. Right now we're not able to articulate those values. I thought it telling that we were so absent from the debates during the Brexit campaign. Not just individuals, but the labour movement collectively. I didn't feel that we were able to postulate an alternative perspective either about Europe or indeed, perhaps more importantly in this context, to be able to speak to those better values. We're the people who surely the press should be calling upon in order to offer a counterbalance, in order to offer a counterweight to some of the ugly discourse we heard from others. And we weren't so often, and I think that is a measure of the scale of the task we now face as a labour movement, because I am deeply worried that we are now becoming less relevant even as our ideas and our values become ever more necessary. That in a moment in our history when the values of the Labour Party feel so in need in Britain, when the need for Labour to speak out strongly in favour of celebration of diversity and celebration of faith and in favour of proper investment in our communities, we're not able to do that. And we're not able to get to the point where we can start turning around those statistics about food banks. We're not able to get to the point where the churches no longer need to work so hard to provide food for people. Now, my campaign, like Jeremy's, has been about laying out what the what I think are the radical ideas that are necessary in this country. I do think we need to radically invest. I do think we need a Keynesian investment programme. I've called it a British New Deal, £200 billion. I do think we need to put an extra £60 billion into our NHS. I do think we need to change our tax system so as to fund our NHS and make our tax system fairer. A wealth tax I've talked about, reducing taxes on working people, increasing taxes on corporations. All of those things are necessary, but in order to do any of that, we've got to win. In order to achieve any of these things, we've got to be in power. And that isn't a dirty word in politics. It's the essence of what the Labour Party was created to do, to put those values, that decency that Hardy understood, into practice, and to stand up for what we believe in, over the road, in Westminster, in the parliamentary pulpit of this country. Now that's what I want to do. I want us to be a really powerful advocate for my faith, my values, my beliefs. But I want to be able to do that in practice, in power, not simply talking about it from opposition. I was 27 before I had the chance to vote for a Labour government and see it come into power. I'm not going to be 60 before I do that again. This country can't afford that. We need to get back to power. And to do that, we need to change the leader of the Labour Party. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Owen. Owen minded that last combative comment that this is a contest. But I have to say, so far, it's one in this has been conducted with great civility, so long may that continue. This is your chance. We've got about half an hour. And I'm going to invite you to pose your questions. You have the slight disadvantages in that you've given them to me, so I hope you can remember the question that you asked. Please keep it as a question. If we find that it's exciting a bit of interest, then we might take some more questions or move to others to comment. So there'll be a bit of a sense of debate. But essentially it's a question and answers, your question to Jeremy and to Owen. So I'm going to kick off, or you're going to kick off, hopefully. Darren Reeves. Are you here, Darren? And you're going to need to wave so that you can get a microphone. The microphone's coming. Yeah. And you have to beg yourself, apparently.
I was mindful today that the Foundation report that said 13 million people in this country today. I was just wondering to myself how a leadership battle speaks that if you can't speak to each other and get on, how are you going to speak to the country? So the people really need to have 13 million people in poverty, and we've got a Labour Party that seem intent not to speak to each other.
Thank you, Darren. Jeremy.
Darren, thanks for your question. The party does have actually a lot of areas of agreement. A lot of areas of agreement on challenging the fundamental economic strategy the government has put forward, particularly since the general election last year. We've also become a party opposed to the welfare policies of this government and the huge cuts they made last year with £12 billion cuts and the attempted cut they made to working tax credits, which we collectively, together, in the country and in Parliament, were able to defeat them on and to drive them back on cuts personal independence payments for those with disabilities, although I'm fearful that the government will come back on that in the autumn statement and try to make them again. But the issues of poverty in Britain come from, yes, inadequate benefits to people that need them, but fundamentally come from low wages. Therefore, we need a much higher minimum wage, a living wage, a real living wage. The TUC figure is £10 an hour. And one of the speakers at our conference this year is going to be Scott Courtney from the United States, who's been part of the campaign there for the $15 an hour fast food workers campaign, as an example of how we can bring people together. It's also about the way in which young people are terribly underpaid by the youth rate, and apprentices are really more exploited by an income rate. It's also crucially about housing issues. We spend billions this country subsidising the private sector through housing benefits because we're not to regulate. I want to see us using that investment bank to invest in good quality, lifetime finances, housing that can give people real security from that need. So take all those issues together, that makes a very, very big difference indeed to the life chances of many people. It's also about equality of opportunity in education and in healthcare, because there are terrible levels of inequality. You can take a bus across London and the life expectancy would be in its upper 80s or 90s in leafy Surrey, would be in the 60s in Lambeth or in Tottenham, and would be back up to the Surrey levels when you get up into Hertfordshire. You could do the same across any city in Britain. Those things are a product of the way in which central government investment is denying the poorest areas what they need and denying the poorest people the opportunities that they need. So ours is not just about changing welfare, it's also about changing the thinking and the way the economy works. And I'll finish on this. I want to see a Labour government success measured by the reduction in the number of people that are street sleeping, reduction in the number of people that are relying on food banks, reduction in the number of children living in desperate poverty. You don't do it with a free market model. You don't do it with tax cuts for the rich and no investment for the rest. You do it the other way around, and that is what I'm determined to achieve. And I think our party can, and I believe will, come together around those principles so that we can take that public debate to the Conservatives, take that public debate to the moral good that many people want to see in our society and in our world, and win a general election with that strategy.
So Darren, let me start with a positive, because I think it is positive that we've had a really radical set of policies put forward by Jeremy and myself during this campaign. I think it's positive that there is a very clear alternative that Labour is offering to the Tories, whoever wins this contest. I think that's where Labour needs to be, always clear about what we believe in and what we want to achieve. And all of the things that Jeremy has just talked about, having a fairer tax system, making sure that we end homelessness, making sure that we invest in our public services, the NHS, etc. We agree entirely about delivering those things and the need for a new culture of investment in Britain. We agree that it isn't a question of whether we can afford to do these things. Can we afford for our children to end up with worse public services, with greater debt, with more insecurity in the workplace and in their lives? We can't. So we do need to invest in this generation. Where Jeremy and I disagree is, I don't think we're on track to be able to put any of that into practice. My fear is that we are on track to be out of power, as we were during those long, dark days in the 1980s and early 1990s, and unable to effect any change in this country, able to talk about it, as we're doing here today, but unable to really effect change. And that, I don't think, is good enough. Now, my evidence to that is that, in the last year when Jeremy and I have worked together, and I'm pleased that we won some good victories on the PIP changes, on tax credits. We got rid of Ian Duncan Smith, and we managed to. It's my proudest achievement. We made some good points, and we scored some good victories, but it's not enough. None of it's enough, because to really change things, we've got to be in power. And the truth is we were behind on 85 out of 89 polls during that period before this contest began. And whilst I'm pleased that we won in London, I'm pleased we won in Bristol, I'm even pleased that we won that parish council by-election in Thanet. You know, none of that is going to translate into a Labour government unless we, frankly, give a different, I think, much more concrete set of policies to the public and offer a much more robust critique of the Tories at the dispatch box and in the country. And that's what I want to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Julie Minns. Julie. Okay.
I'm a Christian. I worship at St Anselm's Church here in Kennington. Kennington is a very diverse community, not just in terms of faith, but in terms of economic diversity. And we recognise at St Anselm's that our mission must appeal broadly to all the sectors of our society, equally to the people who live in the town blocks on the Upper West Estate and people who live in multi-million-pound homes in Cleaver Square. And that's our mission as a church. What will you do to broaden Labour's mission beyond its core vote?
What will you do to broaden Labour's attraction beyond its core vote, Jeremy?
When I gave the earlier answer I did on economy and the speech that I gave, I think there is a moral imperative that many people would sign up to. Even people that are very well off are not comfortable with the levels of homelessness, of poverty, of begging on the streets, of those people that, because of the lack of mental health services, end up in a desperate situation. They also know that many of their children are going to have real difficulty getting anywhere to live, even families that are relatively well off. The bank of mum and dad, the average bank of mum and dad in London cannot get anywhere near a starter home in this city, and they're not likely to get council housing, and they'll pay so much for private rented they will end up being unable to save anything anyway for the future. So I think there is a very general understanding of that. But I would also say to everyone that unless we invest in better infrastructure, unless we invest in a growing economy within our society, then there is going to be higher levels of unemployment in the future. We will not be able to create and provide the jobs that are needed. And unless we invest in the educational needs of all young people, then we will end up returning to something that will look like the 1950s, if not the 1930s, on university admission and access to further and higher education. It's already happening with the levels of fees and the debt levels of so many students. So I think we can make a very strong appeal on the way we develop the economy, the rights and needs of the entire community and population, and also a government that is going to face up to the issues of climate change, of environment, because at the same time as it claims to be supporting these things, disappears from the radar when it's talking about ministerial responsibility on it. So there's a whole lot of areas that we can make that appeal, and I think there is a very strong message in that. A society that is so unequal that as we're developing this country becomes itself a society of the most enormous divisions. You can draw an educational map of attainment from where a baby is born in this country. You can predict where they're going to end up because of that. That is not right, not proper. It means investment in the needs of all. And I think a lot of people would actually buy into and fully support that. And so that is the kind of moral justice, human rights, economic argument that I want to put forward on behalf of our party. Thank you.
Well,
Thanks for the question. When I'm here in London, I'm in Kennington as well. I've got a flat that's somewhere between the Ethelred estate and Cleaver Square.
Is it?
No, it is closer to the Ethelred than it is Cleaver Square, that's for sure. And Kennington's a fantastic place, but as you say, it's a very diverse community. And you're entirely right. And I think the key thing I want to say is, how on earth have we in the Labour Party allowed the Tories to steal from us the notion of ambition and aspiration? How did that happen? You know, the Labour Party is about being ambitious for everybody. I said it earlier on, our duty is to be egalitarians. That means we want to raise everybody up. You know, we're not champagne socialists, but we do want champagne for everybody. Not just Carver and Prosecco, the real stuff. And we should sing that loud and proud. We're about more equal opportunities, but we're about more equal outcomes for everybody in our society. And therefore, it's a case of our making an argument in favour of investment. We do need to invest in our schools and in our hospitals. Everybody, whether they are living in a leafy suburb or they're living in a Labour heartland, wants a decent hospital close by with maternity and peds and A&E, and that isn't happening for many communities in this country. Everybody wants a school where the class sizes are appropriate and they're not groaning at the seams as they are in so many communities. Everybody wants to be able to get in to see the GP without having to ring up for half an hour and then only get an appointment 3 weeks on Thursday. So that fundamental point about investment is one that is neither left nor right, but just right for Britain and can appeal for us, especially in an era in which people have lived with cuts and seen services eroded for so long. But there are other things we need to be doing. Labour does need to speak to the business community with much greater vigour and passion. You know, we are not anti-business. We've never been anti-business. We need to make sure that business are productive and profitable in this country in order to generate the wealth for individuals and for the communal redistribution of that wealth more equitably across Britain by government. We want that. And therefore we should be much more imaginative about, for example, how we're going to incentivise and help the self-employed in this country. Universal credit cuts, they're hitting the self-employed almost as hard as they're hitting women in this country. We should be more creative in terms of what we're going to do in respect of taxation for small businesses. 90% of our employment in this country comes from SMEs. Why is it we've sat through 6 years of the Tories cutting taxes for the very largest corporations and maintaining taxes at relatively high levels for smaller corporations, smaller companies rather, that employ so many of our people? So Labour needs to have something really productive and sensible and creative to say about that, and we can do it, and we've got to seize back ambition and aspiration from the Tories, because they're good words and they're our words.
Okay, so we're going to switch tack slightly now, and I'm also going to switch the order. So I'm going to ask Owen to lead off in answer to this next question from Andy Barnes. Who's over there?
You're going to have to let go of that microphone.
Give in the microphone, thank you. I'm sure you'll get it back.
It's just a question. In the past year, the Tories have gone to their own leadership election, very quickly appointed a new Prime Minister and have gone on with their business. How much ground have we lost to right-wing policy, particularly looking at Brexit and the responses to migrants, etc.?
Can I?
And then because of we're still talking to ourselves.
Can I also, Andy, just to add to your question, because you asked a slightly different question on the piece of paper. So do you mind? Do you mind if I? Yeah. So
wrong, Andy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you ask your question as well, Andy. And so long as we can remember what the previous Andy said, we can get. And I'm also.
It's a good one. I'm going to leave you.
And I'm also going to ask Andy just to say, I'm going to ask the speakers if they can be as succinct as they can in their responses, so that we can rattle through a few more.
No pressure.
No pressure.
So the question was, using your position as the leader or as the potential leader of the Labour Party, how will you use that position to both influence and direct both your MPs and the wider Labour Party, and to send that message through to the kind of wider people?
Okay, Owen. Which one am I going to answer? I'll have a go both. So, I think that one of the key jobs of the leader of the Labour's always been a coalition. I was talking about the inception of the Labour Party earlier on, 116 years ago. From its inception, we've been a coalition of different groups, trade unions and intellectuals, middle class, working class, if you like. And the job of the leader of the Labour Party is to hold that coalition together and to keep it united, in particular in Parliament, from our creation as a parliamentary socialist party, in order to prosecute our arguments in that crucible of debate over the river. That's the job of the leader of the Labour Party, and I think I've illustrated in starting this contest. Well, I say starting, I didn't start it. I didn't actually think we were going to have a contest, but once a contest had been triggered, I felt I had, and I was asked by so many to lead in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I felt I had deep convictions and a deep sense of what I would do as the leader of the party and as Prime Minister of this country, and clearly others thought that too, which is why 170 of my colleagues supported me in this process and have supported me throughout it. And I think I can take from that some degree of comfort that if I win this contest, I will be able to command support and respect in Parliament, and I will therefore be able to marshal Labour's forces in a united fashion against the Tories. I do agree that we've lost ground. The Tories have that extraordinarily democratic moment of Theresa May being crowned as the leader of their party. We are a bit more democratic and a bit more less efficient, shall we say, at passing the baton in the Labour Party, but we'll get there in the end. And in many regards, I think this has been an important dialogue that we've had in the country, in the movement in recent months, and I suspect it will continue beyond this contest, whichever one of us is victorious. Jeremy.
Thanks for your question, both Andys. I was elected a year ago next week, as leader of the party, and I see it as a huge honour and a huge responsibility. I appointed a shadow cabinet that was very broad by any stretch of the imagination, of people who had not supported me in my nomination to become a leader of the party, and indeed had not agreed with me in that campaign. I wanted the party to work together, and I still want the party to work together. After the referendum result, disappointment as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't the result I wanted, and I suspect many in this hall didn't want either. A number of colleagues resigned from the shadow cabinet, and a number of people said I should resign as leader. I declined to do so on the basis that I'd been elected with a substantial mandate by the members and supporters and union affiliates of this party, and I felt I owed it to them that I would continue in that position, and if there was a challenge, we would have a leadership election, and that's exactly what we're doing. During this campaign, I've made it my business to try to reach out to all sections of the party, but also all communities, and take campaign meetings to places that are Tory held, that are even UKIP held, and so that we can try and win people back and win people over to Labour, and that is exactly what I intend to continue doing. We have to confront the Tories on the injustice, poverty and inequality that exists in Britain, and that it is going to get worse whichever wing of the Tory party is in charge in the future. And so after the 24th, I hope this party will come together and realise that we owe it to all those people that are having a bad time under the Tories, and the next generation will have an even worse time, to go out there and campaign on all the principles and justice that, frankly, we agree on. And I hope the members of Parliament will recognise the result of the election and come together and make sure that campaign happens in Parliament as well as outside Parliament.
Thank you. It's obviously much more efficient to ask two questions at the same time, so I'm going to ask...
Was it going to be Jim next?
No, these two people have different names. Phil Curran, could we go to Phil? Where's Phil? And Laura Marks. So, yeah. So, Phil, if you want to ask your question, then we'll go to Laura, who's over here.
I can't remember the question I wrote on the sheet, but
That's That's not allowed. Go on then.
Yeah, so you talk, both candidates have talked a lot about investment in kind of public services and stuff like that, and there's been talk about nationalisation of rail services and stuff like that. What role would cooperatives and the cooperative model play in that?
That is so different from Laura's question. Let's take that one, then we'll come to Laura, and I will match somebody else up with Laura. Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Phil. Cooperatives are very much a part of the Labour movement, and indeed the co-ops were there at the very beginning, and that principle of cooperation and self-government is very important, and the cooperative movement includes worldwide, I think, 1 billion people are members of co-ops in some form or the other. And what I want to do is several things. One is to encourage and support the mutual building societies and mutual banking system, which nationwide is the best example of that, but there are others to continue. I want to ensure that when a company is closing or a company is changing hands, and John McDonnell is working on ideas of this, there should be the opportunity for a workers' buyout, there should be an opportunity to form a cooperative as a result of it, and we'll set up an effective co-op development agency to also encourage the development of new cooperatives. Housing cooperatives are, I think, often a very good way of running housing, because it means the community has to come together to administer them. Obviously, the rent levels are often the lowest of anywhere in the country because they're very efficiently run and able to maintain their properties themselves. And so I think that the principle of cooperation is very important. I want to see it grow, I want to see it expand, and I want to see the principles of cooperation included in business courses, both in school and in college, so that young people looking at various methods of running enterprises or organizations realize what the cooperative spirit is within it. And I've worked on a number of cooperatives in our own local authorities as well as our own local housing providers, because I think it's a very good way of living and a very good way of administering things. Thanks for your question.
Well, the co-ops, of course, weren't there at the beginning. The co-ops were there before the Labour Party, and the industrial cooperative societies in particular in places like South Wales were absolutely essential, formative in the creation of the modern Labour Party and the modern Labour movement. And I think they've still got a huge role. My cousin was part of the workers' buyout of the Tower Colliery after Thatcher, of course, had foolishly closed down all the pits. Some of them were kept open through cooperative structures, and there's still clearly enormous potential in the cooperative structure to be deployed in banking, in energy, in housing, in food distribution, in cultural services. There are myriad terrific examples right across the UK and right across the world of co-op systems that are being deployed. We should be much more open to those as a business model, and the Labour Party should be a catalyst for trying to seed the growth of cooperative models in this country and elsewhere.
Great. I think we've got time for 3 more questions, and we'll take 2 and then come to the last question. So, first of all, Laura Marks, and could we also hear from Eden Bailey? Okay, so Laura's down here, and then Eden is just along the same row, so...
You both talked very eloquently at the beginning about how the Jewish community was involved in the Labour Party over 100 years ago in the setting up of the Labour Party. But obviously I don't need to tell you that over the last few years the Jewish community has become has felt very much that the Labour Party is not for them. And in the last general election, the evidence suggested that under 10% of Jews voted Labour. And in the polls done now, I strongly suspect it will be far lower than that. And an enormous amount of this boils down to a feeling in the Jewish community that anti-Semitism has been allowed to erupt within the Labour Party. Obviously, if you're talking about how hate crime generally is Islamophobia, there's all sorts of other hate crimes out there at the moment, big time. But this anti-Semitism two reports into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party recently. The fact that they've been needed is horrendous from our point of view. And what I want to know is, without platitudes about there's no racism in the party, what I'd like to know is what are you actually going to do about it, whichever you become the leader, which of the report's recommendations you're going to implement, and how strongly you're going to stand up and say we will not tolerate anti-Semitism in the party.
Thank you, Laura.
You both talk very eloquently about education and also issues in hate crime. One thing I'm really concerned about is the PREVENT legislation. It's been condemned by the UCU, the NUT, the NUS. It's really feeding a culture of Islamophobia and hate crimes, particularly in educational spaces. And I feel like there's been a lack of response from the Labour Party about this. Very aggressive Tory legislation that primarily is affecting Muslims and people of colour. It's been, and related to that, how without responding to it, Labour can effectively convince, particularly Muslims, but people of colour and all faiths, to vote for the Labour Party.
Thank you. Erin, do you want to pick up? So on the first question on anti-Semitism, it isn't about votes, is it? I mean, that's the awful thing. But it is a marker, if you like, of how deep this problem is. That the Jewish community, having felt for so long, for a century, that the Labour Party was the party that was best aligned to the values of the Jewish faith and best representative, that we are now at, I think, 8% of the Jewish community in Britain voting Labour. It's a precipitous decline that we've seen in a relatively short period of time. And it's not the votes we should be worried about, it's what that says. What it says about the concerns that exist in the Jewish community. And I've had innumerable conversations during this contest with representatives of the community, with Jewish people in this country who are in the Labour Party, who are interested in the Labour Party, and they are as one in expressing their concerns about that, and expressing their concerns about the recent rise of anti-Semitism within Labour politics. And in part that is a reflection of anti-Semitism more broadly being on the rise in our country and across the Western world, and we've got to acknowledge that, but there is something clearly going on in Labour, that there is an extra level of vitriol and an extra willingness to be anti-Semitic publicly in Labour circles right now. We have a Jewish MP who is being protected by the police as we speak. Now, that should worry us all. That should make us all deeply, deeply concerned. I'm going to say two things. One is that I know Jeremy's commissioned Shami's review, but my experience talking to the Jewish community is that they feel that the review is insufficient, that it doesn't acknowledge the scale of the problem, and that they would like a further review. And if I were the leader, I would conduct a further review in order to try and properly understand this. And I think it doesn't need to be a quick review. I think it needs to be a properly powered review and a properly resourced review that comes to conclusions that people can get in behind and a set of actions that people can get in behind. And therefore, I think that review, whilst it's important as a stepping stone, will need to be superseded. And I would hope whether Jeremy or I win, that either one of us will address that. The final point is, I say, it is about culture, and we've got to be clear, haven't we, that there is zero tolerance in our movement for any sort of racist abuse, but perhaps especially for anti-Semitic abuse, for all of the reasons of history of our movement and of the Jewish people. And we've got to be incredibly strong on that and articulate and out and proud about speaking against it. Because as I said earlier, if we don't, who will? If it isn't us in the Labour Party that speaks against it, who will in this country? On PREVENT, well, let's remember what PREVENT was meant to be. It was meant to be, when Labour created it in 2005, an attempt to put money into increasing community cohesion and stopping isolated, vulnerable people quite often being radicalised. It's clearly failed. And it's clearly failed spectacularly under the Tories, whom I think subverted it even further from its original aims. And it has become seen, I think, by many parts of the community as a sort of a racist form of policing right now. And we will need, I think, to scrap it and completely overhaul it when we win. It's another example of why Labour needs to win, because if we do not build better community cohesion, then all of the sorts of divisions we've talked about this evening will be compounded in the years ahead, and we can all see that it's ever more necessary to make sure that we've got more cohesive communities in London and across the whole of the UK.
Thank you, Laura and Eden, for your questions. Laura, thanks for your question. The rise of anti-Semitism across Europe is appalling. The rise of the far right across Europe is appalling, but also we should pay tribute to those that have defended synagogues that have been attacked, those that have stood up against the far right, particularly in Germany and Austria and other places as well as in this country. I am shocked at the idea that there would be racism within our party, but I know there is. I'm shocked at the idea there should be anti-Semitism, but it's very obvious there have been some anti-Semitic incidents and some anti-Semitic actions taken. Therefore, having received this information and looked at a number of people who had been suspended from party membership and their cases being investigated, I asked Shami Chakrabarti to undertake a report. The reason I wanted it done fairly quickly was so that we could have something in place to bring about a change in the structures in our party. It is obviously not the last word on the subject. Rule changes are envisaged in her report, but also a process that says that we cannot abuse people on the basis of their faith at party meetings or in any other place, and that we conduct ourselves in the proper manner, and that we recognise the right of the Jewish community to express itself and to be able to practice its faith in the way in which they wish to do so. And so anti-Semitism is completely and totally unacceptable in any form whatsoever in this party or within our society. We've just got to say that as clearly as we can. On the question that Eden raised about the Prevent agenda, I have talked to many people who have been in effect asked to police the Prevent agenda. And what it's done is targeted the Muslim community, required teachers to observe what young people, particularly young Muslims, may be saying, thinking, or even researching on the internet. And the effect it has is to actually target a community, whereas I think we need to be preventing the rise of racism within our society, preventing the rise of intolerance in our society, and encouraging people in a direction the very opposite of fundamentalism in their thinking and their actions. And therefore, I have looked at the inquiries that have been done on this, looked at the effect of the Prevent agenda, and talked to people in local mosques and other places about it. And I think we need something completely different, which is a general anti-racist position in society, opposing far right within our society, and ensuring that young Muslims, just as much as any other young people, feel fully involved and participating within our society, not having continually the finger of suspicion placed upon them because they're Muslims, because they go to a mosque, or because they're Muslim women who choose to wear a particular form of clothing. If we live in, as we do, a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial society in Britain, we've got to be proud of it, stand up for it, and respect all that diversity, and actually be happy about it, because it does make us a very different and very special kind of society, which makes certainly the major cities of Britain a microcosm of the rest of the world. So I would absolutely change the Prevent agenda completely in the way that I've just described to you.
Okay, I had hoped that we'd have a bit more time, but I think we've run out, it's 10 to 9. And I'm going to draw the proceedings to a close. And I've got a few thank yous I want to make. I first of all want to thank the lady and the gentleman who very kindly and so expertly handled the mics. I think I can safely say that the mics were carefully protected and were unlikely to come to any harm, so thank you very much. I want to thank all of you. I'm sorry that we only were able to ask, obviously, a small selection of the questions that you asked. I'm the only person in the room, I think, who knows how many fantastic questions were left unasked and unanswered, and I'm sorry about that. But we would have been here for a very long time, I can assure you. But some fantastic questions, and thank you very much for all those who did pop a question in the box, and for those who submitted questions via Twitter. You've been a great audience. We all know that some of these events have been a little bit more trying for the candidates. I think they've had a pretty easy ride, but not in the nicest possible way. Good questions, searching questions, but a very respectful audience. So thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to the Good Faith Partnership who organised this event. Russ Rook and to David Barclay, who've worked very, very hard to bring it about, and we're, as you can tell, we're very grateful. And just a little plug for the Good Faith Partnership, one to watch. And I do hope that the Labour Party, whoever is leader, will use the Good Faith Partnership to keep this kind of engagement going. The Labour Party needs it. We as members of the Labour Party need it, and we want it. And I think tonight has been a fantastic show, has shown that very, very clearly. I want to thank Steve Chalk again, of course, Oasis. Thank you, Steve. Please thank your team as well. You've been very, very generous. I want to thank actually the candidates' teams. I think I'm probably right in saying that you don't often get thanked. So thank you very much. Thank you for responding positively to the approach that this hustings should be organised. Thank you for all the work that you're doing with the candidates. Thank you for giving up your holidays, and good luck. And finally, of course, I want to thank our two candidates very, very sincerely and very warmly on your behalf. I suppose being chair, you do get the privilege of a last word. I think we've got two candidates for the leadership of the Labour Party who have shown this evening that they can listen, which is not always a quality with politicians. They can answer questions directly and with courtesy. And actually, if I might say so, I think we have two candidates which are qualities that not only members of the Labour Party are looking for in their leader, but the people of this country are looking for in the leadership of parties, and dare I say it, and we can all hope, in the Prime Minister. So I want to thank you very much, Jeremy and Owen. We deeply appreciate the time you spent with us and the honesty and directness with which you've answered our questions, and I hope you'll show your appreciation.